Well, good evening and welcome to Central Presbyterian Church. So great to see all of you here tonight. We're so thrilled that you could all join us for this evening's event. My name is Matthew Mazzoni. I am the Director of Music here at Central Pres. And as I said, it's a delight to see you all. We're thrilled to also be doing this concert in conjunction with the Carver Project. And I think many of you are here tonight through WashU, and we are also thrilled to welcome you here to this event. At Central, we have, this is part of a concert series. And if you look on the back of your program, you'll see we do have a few events coming up that I would like to highlight for you, should you want to come back and hear more. On April 11th, we're having an event we're calling Lenten Evensong that will feature Duraflé's masterful choral Requiem. And if you've never heard this piece, it is a beautiful and sublime setting of that text, and would welcome you all to come and hear that. And some of you who are regular attenders at our concert series will notice that we skipped one. We were supposed to have a concert in early February, but we're unable to do so. But fear not, it has been rescheduled. So if you look, the REL series Chamber Players is now been rescheduled for June 16th. So we will be delighted to welcome you all to that. It's a little later than our season normally runs, but even in early June, you can come hear some classical music through that. The concert series here at Central is supported entirely through donations. And if you would be interested in supporting our series for ongoing events that you see here, you are welcome to make a donation. Even if you're not a member of Central, one thing to bear in mind is if you donate to the concert series, it goes to specifically that function. So it always goes to promote the arts and these types of events that we have that bring the community together around these musical opportunities. Tonight's concert is going to be a very fascinating opportunity to explore the world of Beethoven. Mia is going to be both lecturing and speaking about Beethoven and bringing us into his world and thinking in all kinds of fascinating ways about creativity and how that art expresses so many wonderful things, and then playing the piece that she's going to be discussing. So we will have this really fascinating kind of look into this world. At the end of that time, there will be some Q&A. If you would like to participate with a question, there's a microphone right here in the aisle, and so you are welcome to come up. We will help you find your way, and you're welcome to pose questions, and we'll have a little bit of Q&A time. And then following that, we're having a reception, which is downstairs, and it's in a large fellowship hall room. It's very easy to find because you go out any door you find, go down any stairs you find, and you'll probably be right there. So should be very straightforward for you. As always, if you're a guest with us here at Central and you would be interested in visiting us on a Sunday, you're always welcome. So you're welcome to check out our website and check out when we gather, and we would be most welcome to come and join us for that experience too. As I mentioned, this is a joint partnership with the Carver Project, and so here to speak a little about Carver and what you have coming up is the professor and chair of the English department, as well as the executive director of the Carver Project, Abram Van Engelen.
Thanks. Well, it's lovely to see you all here tonight. It's just a glorious gathering, and I just want to thank Central Presbyterian Church for having us. This is a beautiful space, and it's a beautiful thing to be here tonight. Mia Chung is amazing. You're in for a real treat. I've known her for a few years now. We met out at a Veritas Forum event, and pretty much everything she does is just kind of astounding. So he's going to do the official introduction, but this is just my way of saying, like, holy cow, this is amazing. And you are the lucky ones for being here tonight. I'm here to represent the Carver Project, which is co-sponsoring this event tonight. And just so you know what the Carver Project is, we're a group of Christian faculty at WashU, and our mission is to empower Christian faculty and students to serve and connect university, church, and society. So I'm going to actually do something a little bit embarrassing. If you're a Christian faculty member at WashU right now who's here tonight, would you be willing to raise your hands for just a quick moment? So these are all Christian faculty members, and they're all in different departments. And the thing to know about what it means to be a Christian faculty member at WashU is that we're equally committed to, we say we have 2 feet in the church and 2 feet in the university. That is, we're committed to the mission of the university, and we're committed to the mission of the church in which we have our home. And what we see as our mission is building bridges between those sort of core institutions in society and getting them to understand one another and also speak together about common interests and common goals. And there's a lot of great work that can be done. Some of the work that we do, so one of the things that we do is that we meet monthly as faculty to build community and to support one another in the work. Last night there were about 25 people. We all got together in one person's home. Mia came and talked to us about a different part of Beethoven than we'll hear tonight, and it was amazing. Faculty also lead discussion groups and reading groups with graduate students and undergraduate students. We have 7 of those vocational discipleship groups right now. They're in law, business, medicine, health, humanities, and art. As well as international students have another group. We're partnered with 14 local churches in St. Louis, and it's just an extraordinary set of people that I've gotten to know and do some really great work with. There are 75 Christian faculty members on our listserv. And each month, about 25 of them, differing, it all rotates as calendars allow, come to dinner together, and it's just a really great group. If you ever want to support the mission of the Carver Project or find out more about us, it's at carverstl.org online, and you could check out all the various programs that we offer. I just know that a lot of us who are gathered here tonight know Central Presbyterian Church. We're here because we're Christians, and we see that as a sort of way of serving in the world. Some of us who are here tonight are not Christians and are wondering what Christian faculty at WashU are like. And the thing that we're like is like other faculty at WashU. That's a lot of what we're like. But also this sense of being driven by a vocation to serve. And a lot of what we do together is ask each other, how do we serve in the university well? How do we serve in society well? How do we serve the church well? And a lot of what we do is ask that question of one another. Are you serving well? And tonight, what we get to do is a little less service and a little more just reception, to be nourished by somebody like Mia Chung, who has served all her life in extraordinary institutions like the Curtis Institute, like MIT and Harvard, and who gets to just share her gifts with us tonight. So it's a great opportunity, and I'm just thrilled to be here. So you will pray for us and actually do the intro. I'm sorry, I've been talking about Mia because she's so awesome, but you can do the intro.
That's fine. It makes my job a lot easier. I will mention there is an event for the Carver Project that there's some information on the tables for on April 4th, another gathering for one of their Carver conversations. It's these blue forms. So you can grab one of these and by all means check it out. Let us take a moment and just bow before the Lord in prayer. Father in heaven, Lord, we thank you for bringing us together tonight. Thank you for revealing yourself through beauty, through the goodness and the truth that you bring. Lord, I pray that you would, through tonight's work, experience, that you would draw us a little closer to you and give us a measure of your peace, that we may just see you manifesting in all of these places. We pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen. There's no further introduction needed, so ladies and gentlemen, Mia Chung.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be with you all tonight. I'm just going to situate my water here. Thank you for devoting your Friday evening to this conversation on Beethoven's Waldstein Sonata. It's such a joy to be talking about music and musical design. Am I doing something wrong with the mic? Am I good? Okay, great. So first off, just thank you for being here. Thank you to the Carver Project for Abram's introduction there, and Matt's as well for Central Presbyterian, and your love of music, and viewing the arts as really a conduit to understanding our world and our creator better. It's such a rich landscape of investigation and exploration that will actually ultimately bring us closer and have a fuller understanding of what it means to be human. After concertizing for many, many years, being on the road and just playing music, and as a pianist, I sit like this and I don't actually get to see your faces, right? I developed this profound longing to actually see people, to be able to look you in the eye, right? And so I had profound envy of other instrumentalists who could actually look at their audience members when they played music. And I realized that the secondary love, which was of talking about music, sort of describing it, parsing it, sort of sharing insights, was one way in which I could actually accomplish that and combine that with performance. And so thank you for accommodating me, if you will, and enabling me to develop a rapport and a connection with you. So one of the reasons why I love talking about musical design so much is because musical design shares so much, it reveals so much about what it means to be human. And musical design in the classical style, in this case, the sonata form or sonata style, which is what the Waldstein sonata is cast in, really paves forth a narrative arc, right, that has, for some reason, been enduring in our imaginations, in our minds. It's captured something about what it means to be human that we can't put our fingers on. But I will say this, that the original narrative, the biblical narrative of creation, fall, redemption, restoration, there is a narrative arc in that. And there's a return and a fulfillment in that arc that fascinates us. And so in classical music, this is no different. There is a similar underpinning. And what I hope to do tonight is to walk you through that underpinning, because this underpinning reveals something about our longings, our deepest longings, our interest in journey and travel. This notion of establishing home, moving away from it, sort of wandering around and finally returning back to home. There's something very fascinating about that to us. But at the same time, what I hope to do is to highlight the ways in which Beethoven does this in a uniquely innovative way. And he raises and heightens this element of drama in his music, which is why his music has been so much of a centerpiece of the classical canon, right? We love his works for a reason. They're masterpieces, yes, in craftsmanship, in thinking, but they're emotionally gripping, right? And we have to understand why that's the case. Now, just a side note, and I have to say this because in our current moment, artificial intelligence is occupying so much of our news headlines and sort of the worries about the future. And so then questions about what it means to be human are of course, surfacing, right? What are the distinctives? What are the differences? AI is going to continue to catch up and be able to do new and more astounding things. It will compose music, absolutely. There's no doubt about that. And as I talk about structure, I'm deeply mindful of the fact that I am reducing it to kind of a formula or recipe, right? Which provides access, but at the same time runs the risk of being overly reductive, right? And by reducing it, I don't want you to say, oh, I know what that piece is about. My encouragement and my huge invitation to you is to continue exploring this work by listening to it in live performance many times, because I want you to experience the inspiration, the emotional impact that was born of profound suffering and journey through suffering and sort of an enlightened understanding of his purpose as a composer. And we as listeners can resonate with that because we too understand suffering. Maybe not to the degree that he did, right? But we understand what it means to be human. So these are the distinctives, the emotional resonance. When AI writes music, it might be full of craft, but the question is, does it inspire and move you? Does it make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, right? That's question A. And 2, can it innovate the way that Beethoven does, like bringing in new ideas that were unprecedented, or maybe even stretching and testing the limits of classical structure in a way that is, mind-blowing. And I'm hoping to demonstrate that to you tonight through the vehicle of the Waldstein Sonata. So thank you so much for indulging me. So let me just say this. Form, which is what I'm going to be concentrating on, and you have a little Xerox in your program, right? Which is a very highly simplified, little piece of information. I won't ask you to take a quiz, and I won't ask you to take notes or anything. But for right now, just know that it's there, but you don't have to look at it yet. Form has meaning. In other words, the vessel, right, the container in which music is placed has meaning. And you should know that the sonata style, sonata form, which is what this Waldstein sonata is in, was very much a product of the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment, of course, placing its emphasis and its eggs in the basket of reason and logic, right, essentially democratized understanding of music, okay? Because if people understood the sort of classical symmetry and balance of these sonatas, then everyone could also understand the deviations away from that, the explorations, the experimentations. Does that make sense? Okay. So there is something very beautiful about the access that these structures provide, while also revealing certain universal truths about what resonates with us in terms of artistic and musical expression. Previously, this was really only the domain of the privileged, the aristocrats, the noble folk, right? Aristocracy. And so now everyone gets to partake in enjoying this great art. So it's universalizing understanding and access. Now, the coherence and the musical logic is all about balance and symmetry. And notice this, that music has a coherence based on return, repetition. In other words, themes that are introduced in the beginning will always return. And Arthur Schopenhauer, who wrote, Will and Representation, he's a German philosopher, The World as Will and Representation, said this about music. He was absolutely enamored of the power of music. How full of meaning and significance the language of music is, we see from the repetition signs, as well as the da capo, which means the return of a theme, which would be intolerable in the case of works composed in the language of words. Right? In music, however, they are very appropriate and beneficial, for to comprehend it, the musical theme fully, that is, to fully understand or comprehend the musical theme, we must hear it twice. That's interesting, isn't it? Why is that? Fascinating. Beethoven understood this very, very well. And then I also hope to tie into this discussion of musical logic and coherence the individuality of Beethoven's expression, where he is pushing the envelope, right? Pursuing innovation, not for the sake of innovation, but for the sake of inspiration and narrative. The storytelling is unmistakable in his music. And this is abstract expression, right? So you might be saying, what kind of a story is this? Is this an explicit description of going to the store, buying milk and cheese and eggs and returning home? No, it's always about some sort of existential journey. Before I sort of tee up the nature of this existential journey, I feel like I should tell you about a moment in his life that was utterly catastrophic. So by 1802, Beethoven was 32 years old. He was living in the city of Vienna. He had sort of ascended to the great heights of his career, and he was known as sort of the next Haydn or Mozart, expected fully to take on that mantle, okay? And he notices that his hearing is diminishing. And actually, he started to perceive that several years earlier, as early as the late 1790s, okay? But by 1802, he was genuinely gripped by fear and anxiety. So he wrote something called the Heiligenstadt Testament. Heiligenstadt is a forested area outside of Vienna that his doctors encouraged him to retreat to as a means of sort of de-stressing, perhaps getting out of the hustle and bustle of expectation and busyness of Viennese urban life, and to retreat and seek solace in nature, rest, recuperate, be restored. So in Heiligenstadt, he wrote this letter. And I actually brought with me a facsimile of the letter, which is a prized possession. And should anybody be interested in seeing it at the end of this presentation, I welcome you to come check it out. But this letter was written to his brothers, Johann and Caspar, and it really was a suicide note. He was basically saying, I'm losing my hearing, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm in a moment of profound crisis, all right? So let me read a passage from this Heiligenstadt Testament for you to give you an idea of how great this moment was for him. Great in the bad sense. But what a humiliation for me when someone standing next to me heard a flute in the distance and I heard nothing, or someone heard a shepherd singing and again I heard nothing. Such incidents drove me almost to despair. A little more of that and I would have ended my life. It was only my art that held me back. It seemed impossible to me to leave this world before I had produced all that I felt capable of producing. And so I prolonged this wretched existence, truly wretched, for so susceptible a body that a sudden change can plunge me from the best into the worst of states. Divine One, you knowest my inmost being, my soul, and you know it therein dwells the love of humanity and the desire to do good. Now, the reason I chose the Waldstein Sonata tonight is because it was the first major sonata written after this letter was penned. And what you will notice is when he says, but for his art, right? It was his art form that kept him going. He felt like this was urgency, basically, to compose and fulfill, right, his potential to write as many great works as he could. So this work is actually groundbreaking when it comes to the piano repertoire. And it's this period also where his great symphonies, like his Third Symphony, the Eroica in E-flat, his Fifth Symphony in C minor, a lot of his very famous works come from this middle period, which began right after the wake of that letter in 1802, okay, after he wrote that. So what I hope to show here is sort of the narrative art form re-envisioned by Beethoven, all right? He always had the desire to innovate, but he actually launches into a whole new dimension. And the works get longer and longer and longer. Do you know why? Because these stories are filled with more detours, more intrigue. And what is he doing? He's essentially establishing a fundamental tension that he has to then resolve. And it's the artfulness and the inspired nature of the manner in which he resolves the tension that is so powerful. And I hope to give you insight into this through the Waldstein Sonata. Okay? Now, if you take a look at your handout, I'm now going to refer to plot design in literature. I always feel like it's a good thing to sort of do an interdisciplinary plunge when talking about music. And the written form, I believe, at least in today's culture, may have a little bit more resonance than, say, the abstract language of music, okay? So in plot structure, we basically have 5 different phases, right, to the narrative design. And Abram is probably going to take a hook and haul me out after I describe this, right? Because who am I to be talking about this? But at least, in a very cursory way, I hope to tie this to sonata style, okay, and the similarities of it. First, there's an exposition. And in a novel, for example, a piece of fiction, the author is going to establish the setting, right, and the protagonist and the antagonist. Basically sort of establish the actors, right, through which the plot will then be woven. Then there's rising action, the identification of a fundamental tension or issue, right, that has to be resolved. And then by phase 3, so that was, rising action was phase 2, by phase 3, you reach a climax. This is a climactic moment where that tension will need to be resolved in some manner. Stage 4 is falling action, right, moving towards a kind of cadence or resolution, which is the denouement, right, bringing closure to this story. Abram, am I doing okay? Great. Oh, awesome. Thank you, brother. Okay. So you might say, well, what the heck does that have to do with sonata style? You'll hear in just a moment. But first, a little music theory digression. For those of you who took music theory and have been traumatized by it, I promise to take a light touch. I need to establish a couple of concepts. The first is the home key. Every piece that's tonal, if it's C major, C minor, D major, D minor, this means that's the home key. The Waldstein Sonata is in C major, so C major is the home key. A key partner in the identification of this home key, right, which leads to the resolution to the home key, is actually the 5. So 5, 1. And why do I say 5? Because G is exactly 5 up from C. So C is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's G, okay? Now, interestingly enough, there's a sidekick that often pushes the music towards the 5, and that's the 4. 4, 5, 1. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. So guess what? All of rock music is based on this. 1, 6, 4, 5, 1. Got it? Now there you have it. That's it. That's rock music in its sum total. I don't mean to diminish it at all, but there is some truth in that. Okay. So now you know the underpinnings, and these sort of harmonic pillars are going to come into play. I want to call upon them, okay, here and there, as we talk about the structure in the Waldstein Sonata. All right. So now, just a word about sonata style. Sonata style has been the most enduring musical form in Western classical music, okay? You know, it was already well underway in the 17th century, so in the 1600s, we saw sonatas appear, and it continues all the way till today. And you have to ask yourself, why is this thing so enduring? Because it's that structure still enables composers to create highly emotive, powerful works, because it's robust, it's rigorous, it can handle, right, the emotion that is placed in the container, okay? So, let's start with the Waldstein Sonata. But before we do that, you have a second diagram on your Xerox there. You see that, the sonata style? Let me compare this to plot structure. We have an exposition. Same word, right? And in the exposition, we identify the home key or the setting. And we identify two things, typically in a major key, which the Waldstein Sonata is, it's in C major. We have the first theme. In C major, okay? That's in the home key of 1. And then what you're going to see, so that's the protagonist. And then you have a secondary theme. It's not an antagonist, but let's just say it's the opposite of this first theme. And it's typically cast in 5, okay, the dominant key. And then what happens is in the development, these ideas will begin to wander and circle through all sorts of other key areas. This is the most destabilizing moment in the entire piece. So this is the rising action, if you will, in the plot, okay, of literature. Then the climax is the moment in which the composer is going to restore the original theme. And when he restores the original theme, it comes back in 1. But guess what? The secondary theme, which is in 5, will also return in 1. You see that? So that fundamental tension between 5 and 1 has been resolved through that journey, harmonic journey taken in the development. And then in the coda, which is the closing section, the 1 is affirmed. Okay? Now, there's a huge caveat, qualifier in this. Composers did not write music according to numbers, or like painters don't paint by numbers. Composers did not compose according to this recipe. In fact, this structure wasn't identified until the mid-19th century. So years after the fact, theorists are always a little behind. You know what I mean? Like they follow up the rear. So the inspiration happens, and then the theorists say, well, now I think I know what's going on. Let me tell you. Okay? So the theory came afterwards. But the fact is why do we see this balance and symmetry everywhere? It's because these classical composers we're very much informed by Greek notions of balance and symmetry. Okay, think of like pillars, right? Neoclassical pillars, the balance and structure of that. So this is like the musical equivalent of that. So this balance and symmetry happens through the interaction of these harmonic areas, travel and restoration. But guess what? There's a lot you can do to push and pull at these pillars within this container to make the story contain way more intrigue, mystery, tension, and drama, and ultimately resolution. And so that's what Beethoven is going to maximize, okay? So again, please keep in mind, this is highly reductive, this structure. And when it's in a minor key, it's going to go through different harmonic relationships, okay? But we won't get into that today. Okay, so let me identify for you the areas that I want you to be thinking about in this piece. I already paid for you the first theme. By the way, this is rock and roll, if in case you're wondering, all right? I mean, look at, this is 1803, 1804. What the heck is that? You know, like, where's the melody? It's just rhythm, right? Propulsive rhythm. And in fact, the entire movement, the first movement is like that. He doesn't give us a break. Not a beautiful melody. But the secondary theme goes like this. And what is that? That's actually hymn texture, isn't it? So he goes from the earthy, propulsive, to this gloriously beautiful, transcendent choral theme. But you notice the register changes? I'm like way down low to high. This is a kind of a binary dialogue, all right, that will persist throughout the entire movement. And it'll come to its absolute climax in the last movement. And we'll get to that in a second. Now, here's something else. So if the secondary theme is supposed to be in 5, we have a problem. Because this secondary theme is in 3. It's in E major. E major is 3 above C. 1, 2, 3, okay? And we're like, why is that? Music theorists are like, why is that? So I'm going to put forth a theory as to why, okay? Later on. I'm not going to give it away yet. Then what happens is we enter something called the development. And this is where the music continues to modulate and travel, all right, incessantly. And this is what it sounds like. It starts off in F major. F, by the way, is the 4 in 1. Remember? 4 leads to? Leads to? Yay, great. Who's that? Who's saying? Oh, yeah, very good. Chocolate bar to you, okay? So here's how it starts in F major. D major. G minor. C minor. F minor. See how I'm going through all these different keys? Do you see how harmonically unstable it is? Well, guess what? Beethoven was famous for like drawing these development sections out really far and wide. Like he made them longer and longer. And you say, oh my goodness, like how much weight can this structure take before it's going to tip over, right? But that's the mastery, his ability to establish a sort of balance later on in spite of destabilizing the texture, okay? So that's a bit of the development. What I want you to listen for, however, is how he's going to return to that primary theme. So you're going to listen for this moment, all right? After modulating and modulating. This is all development. He finally gets to the 5. 5, 1. Okay, did you see how long he prolonged that 5? G. Right? Forever and ever. And we're like, when is he going to resolve it? And then he's got this great scale. And then C major. Back to 1. Okay? Now, which is true to Beethoven. You think, we're in the home stretch, baby. We know where home is, right? 2 more right turns and we're there. And that's not what he does. You know what he does? He starts throwing us in new harmonic directions. A little fake out and then back to 1. But guess where the secondary theme comes back? It's supposed to come back in what key, according to your diagram? Someone said it. 1, right? Because that means the tension, the fundamental tension between 1 and, in this case, 3 has been resolved. You know what he does? He goes to 6. Sorry. A major. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. C, D, E, F, G, A. Okay? And you think, what? Why? Like, come on, Beethoven, can't you just do the conventional? It's not in him. All right? And then finally we get the coda section. And then you know what he does in the coda section? He goes to D flat, my friends. D flat, half step above C. So he's continuing to develop and modulate away from C. And you think, can this sonata style structure handle this much tension? It can, but there's a reason why. The reason is because the tension and the resolution is spilling over to subsequent movements. Now, this is a very important insight for you to remember. Beethoven is not thinking of these 3 movements as sort of freestanding, separate buckets or units, which is what a lot of classical composers like Mozart and Haydn typically thought of the separate movements as really separate affections or emotional states. Right? Freestanding statements. And only with a rare occasion did they violate that idea. But Beethoven violates that a lot, starting from his middle period all the way to the end. What he's basically doing is keeping the resolution, the true resolution, from happening within the confines of the first movement. Does that make sense? And he's pushing it to the second and the third movements. And as is his true nature, he starts to back-weight the work. In other words, the true substance and resolution will happen in the final movement. And this is something he continues to pursue in his subsequent sonatas, all the way to the end, okay? Now, I just wanted to raise one other issue in this, the analogy of kids who don't like their food to mix. So like, movements 1, 2, and 3, it's kind of like a child who says, Mom, my potatoes should not run into my meat, should not run into my green beans and peas, right? That's what sort of the separate freestanding movements are like. Beethoven's like, no, sorry about that. The mashed potatoes are running into the chicken, right? And pouring over into the green beans. So this is sort of how I view this notion of the 3 movements. The 3 movements are part of a singular journey, an overarching journey. Does that make sense? Okay. Great. Now, this is what the coda sounds like. I want you to taste this because it's such an oddball, right? He starts off in D flat. This is C major. Now, you wonder why he went to D flat? In the beginning, he goes down to B flat. There's even a symmetry in this. Now he's going up. Where's C major? He's still continuing to travel. And you think, My goodness, when is he going to resolve this? Within at least the first movement, we got to get to C major. And it's only in the very closing measures he does this. 5, 5, and the hymn theme returns, now this time in the bass. In C major, and then the first theme, also in C major. One, 5, 1. Okay? That's the first movement. Hold on to your hats, because now we're going to the second movement. And the second movement is the complete opposite of the first and the third. It's this pithy, tiny little statement of existential questioning. It's all about questioning and wandering and not being sure of its footing. The rigor and the earthy material quality of that first movement is defied by the nature of this uncertainty. Do you notice the upward gestures? These are questions like, what was that all about? Like, am I crazy? Another question. And so it goes. Question after question, and he's going to ask a third question. Now, know this. This movement is situated in F major. Do you remember what F is in the key of C? 4. Why do you think he sets this up in 4? It's because he's preparing a stunning, transcendent, complete resolution from 5 to 1. So in other words, the energy of the coda that was in D flat of the first movement is spilling over into the second movement. And so now the demand for resolution 5 to 1 is going to happen in the juncture between the second and the third movements. Remember, the secondary theme was in 3 and then in 6 in the recap. You know why he doesn't do 5 and 1? Because he's preserving this 5 to 1 relationship for this very special moment. Does that make sense? If he had done it in 5 and 1 in the first movement, it would just be banal, right? Routine by the time you get to the second and third movement. So he's preserving that. That's why he made this an exceptional key area of 3 and 6 for the secondary theme in the exposition and recap. Now, I want you to listen to this. The 4 is not going to go to 5 willingly, okay? There's going to be a struggle in this. So I want you to hear this struggle. That's the 5. A flat in the bass. Then he goes away. G sharp. Come on, Beethoven, can't you just stay put? Then it goes to A, the 6, and then finally F, which is subdominant substitute here. 4, 5, and then we hear this from the upper registers. G, the 5, That's the last note of the second movement. And now this is the first note. The resolution is the first note of the third movement. C. And then the ethereal, transcendent theme comes in, the beginning of the third movement. Again, this registral exploration. Do you see how high up and ethereal it is in the upper register? Well, guess what? This is a rondo structure, which means that theme, that rondo theme that I just played for you, will return in an alternating fashion. And the intervening sections are actually going to be the picture of the earthy again. That first movement, that material quality is not going to go easily, and it comes like this. You see I'm way down in the low register? All right, so now you have this dialogue, basically, right, of polar opposites, the ethereal and transcendent with the earthy. And this notion of sort of polar opposites, pursuing polar opposites, becomes way more pronounced after his middle period, all the way to the late. He loves the juxtaposition of the profane, the sacred, the rugged, the earthy, right, and the transcendent. All right, so the base and the exalted. You can use various different words, right, to call this sort of exploration of opposites. The theme returns again. Notch that away. That's the rondo theme. And then the earthy comes back again. Another section like that, and you think, man, how long can this go on? Right? The alternation of the ethereal, the base, the ethereal or the earthy. And finally, what happens? After doing these explorations for a while in alternating fashion, there is no choice but to launch this into the stratosphere, speed-wise. It's called the prestissimo, which means as fast as you can play. And this is honestly the most vexing moment of the entire work for every pianist, okay? He goes like this. After just the tirade, he's all in 5. G, 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 G. 1. Okay, so it launches into a whole new level of energy, and the conclusion is nothing but explosive and triumphant. Okay, everybody with me? Okay, so now I think I need to retire the gift of gab and perhaps start playing, okay? Is that okay? Do you feel like you have a lay of the land and what to expect? Excellent. All right. Let's give this a whirl. But before I do that, let me make sure I didn't forget anything that I wanted to share with you. I think I got it. Oh, and here's the other point. Now that you know what the special moments are, my hope is that you will listen to lots of different recordings to hear how different artists handle this structure. Some are cognizant of it, some are not, okay? For some, it's purely intuitive that they are picking up on these sort of structural cues. But every pianist handles things differently. And yet it works. And that's the beauty of interpretation. And that's something AI cannot do because we are embodied creatures. So my interpretation of this is the product of my personality, my lived and learned experiences as a musician and a music professor, right? Shaped by the perspectives of my mentors, et cetera, et cetera. And another pianist will bring a whole other batch of perspectives, right? Based on their lived and learned experiences. So that's the beauty of what it means to be human. And so my hope is that we can all collectively keep this tradition alive. Because as time goes on and as technology and AI advances, we run the risk of being stripped of our uniqueness, the richness, right, the holistic goodness of what God invested in us. So let's not forget. And by keeping these pieces alive, experiencing them in concert, in live performance, we are actually giving our small contribution to keeping that spark, that ember alive, okay, of what it means to be human. Okay, here we go. Put on your seatbelts, folks.
Yes, well, thank you. Such a brilliant performance. At this time, we're going to open up for some Q&A about anything you would like to ask about regarding what we've talked about or what we've heard about. We have a microphone right here. So is there anyone who would like to come forward and bring a question up? Would you be willing to come up to the mic here for us, sir? I know it's a bit of a walk.
As an extraordinarily competent musician, but also as a Christian, what particular piece of Christian music is your favorite, and why is it?
So, there's a wealth of music from the sacred tradition, like St. Matthew's Passion, St. John's Passion, the Elijah Oratorio, all of these wonderful sort of sacred, sort of biblical text-based Handel's Messiah. So I would certainly say that these works are chief among them. But of the piano works that explicitly reference sort of a Christocentric message, I would probably say his penultimate Piano Sonata, Opus 110, which is in A-flat major, his 31st of 32.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And make yourself ready.
Thank you so much for the performance. Forgive me, I didn't quite follow why he chose to, in the first movement, to go from C to D flat. So if you could explain.
D flat in the coda?
Yes.
So, what's interesting in structural explorations is, you remember I described the development as being sort of vast and more expansive, like he's upping the ante with the tension and the modulatory wandering. The symmetry of this is important. If the exposition and the recap are sort of these balancing pillars, right? The development needed to be balanced by a more expansive coda. Does that make sense? So the D-flat wandering serves two purposes. It's, first of all, to destabilize the ending so that it would throw the resolution over to the second and third movements. But it's also to stabilize the expansive nature of the development, if that makes sense. And this is something that he does a lot in his middle period. The Eroica Symphony is probably one of his best vivid examples of that, Opus 55. So, yeah. Does that make sense? Great. Thank you for asking that. I love that clarifying question.
Thank you. I had been introduced to sonata form 14 years ago, and it's great to have this expanded. It's really been helpful. Where does Waldstein fit in with his other works? For example, the symphonies or the Appassionata or Moonlight. Where does it fit in?
Yeah, so this is Opus 53, and the Appassionata is Opus 57, so that comes very close by. The Eroica Symphony is Opus 55, so these are like all clustered in very close proximity to one another.
And he's working out this same kind of tension with regard to his hearing and his depression and whatever else through the music during this period of time.
Yeah, and what you sense in the middle period is really sort of the response to his crisis was to throw himself into composition. And sort of there's a sense of urgency and intensity about the energy of the music, which sort of conveys, I think, that sense of reinvesting, if you will, sort of re-anchoring himself in that purpose of composition, and almost a feverish level of writing and productivity. But, you referenced the word sonata form, and I just wanted to add a qualifier to this. A musicologist theorist named Charles Rosen, who's one of my favorites, he was based in the University of Chicago, is no longer with us, but he used to call it sonata style. And the reason he referred to it as style versus form is he really wanted to convey this notion that it wasn't a recipe, and that for every sonata that fulfilled this prescription, of form that I described, there are just as many, if not more, that are exceptions to those rules. Like the composers are always bucking this notion of any uniformity. For example, like Beethoven's First Symphony, he doesn't establish the one from the beginning. He gives us an introduction, which is anything but one, and it wanders until it hits one at the very allegro, right, which is the true beginning of the symphony. So that's an example. Or, in the recap, a composer may not recall the first theme. He might only recall the secondary theme, for example, right? So there are so many exceptions to these rules, but therein lies the beauty, because if you know the convention, right, the expected convention, then you can also appreciate the deviations and the exceptions, right? So.
Thank you. I'm going to go back and listen more closely to the stories that have been told.
Thank you.
Okay. I didn't study too much music history or music theory or even world history or anything, but it just occurs to me, how great the German composers were and how Germany was the cradle of the Protestant Reformation.
Yes.
Do you think those things are related?
Oh, absolutely.
Do you?
Absolutely. So, for example, Martin Luther introduced a whole new genre, the chorale genre, right? Sort of this hymns basically are a relative of these choral textures were very vertical, right? They're harmonic. We sing them every Sunday. That whole choral tradition was birthed because of the Protestant Reformation. And Martin Luther was a very experienced, knowledgeable musician as well. Okay? So from that then came choral societies, right? Hymn sings. All of these things actually emerged in the aftermath of the Protestant Reformation. So yes, there's a deep connection. And also know that within the Austro-Germanic tradition, all of these important forms sort of were birthed, in that sort of the cradle of that cultural center.
I just can never believe how many, Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, Mendelssohn,
Absolutely.
Schubert,
Yeah.
it just goes on forever in that country.
And a lot of that has to do with the exploration of structure and devices like fugues, for example, or sonata style, rondo form. All of these things. The structure to Germans is very important. You know this, right? How many Germans do we have in the room? Right? Okay, all right. So you you appreciate that, even the language itself, right? So
Thank you.
yeah, of course, it's native.
Hi. So when you say like this music ties into narrative design and there's like this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 exposition, development,
Capitulation.
recap, and a coda. Are you talking about just with each movement, or is there like a bigger picture with the 1, 2, and the 3?
Yeah, very good. So that is strictly within the first movement. That form, that sonata style form. Excellent question.
So,
now, that doesn't mean you can't use sonata style in the final movement. Yes, sometimes it happens. All right. Typically, it's a rondo form, which is, I sort of told you, you have this returning refrain theme. Rondo means coming around again, right? The theme returns over, and it becomes the sort of the sinew that connects or creates cohesion for the movement in that expansive third movement, for example. But yes, excellent clarifying question.
is it like easy to explain? Well, I guess it's not, but I don't know. I was just asking. How does the first, second, and third like tie together? Is it like the second is a lot of dissonance and the third is just like mostly major? It didn't sound like that.
Yeah. So the first movement is an exploration of one with those, of course, those experimental, journeys away and destabilization, even at the end, the coda, the D-flat section. The second movement is an F major, the subdominant, and basically very, sort of existential questions being asked. It's the antithesis of the concreteness of the first movement. But the 4 is the subdominant, and really the struggle is to get to the 5 by the end of the second movement, okay? And it serves as a short introduction to the final movement. And that's classic Beethoven, to connect movements. Connecting by literally placing the 5 at the end of the second movement and the 1 at the beginning of the third movement, right? That is classic Beethoven, do something like that. And then the final movement is a rondo movement in C major, right? That basically encapsulates the tension between the earthy and the transcendent in its alternation. I hope does that make sense?
I think so.
Thank you. Thanks for your question.
This is an interdisciplinary question.
Sure.
So I'm a physical therapist.
Okay.
And I watched your body move, your hands move as you played music. And I wondered, you probably haven't watched yourself play much, but I wonder how you feel the music through your hands and through your body motion.
Yeah, that's so it's a very complex question, right? Because I went through various different seasons, like in my posture of playing. And today was a little exceptional because somehow, I don't know what happened. I think I must have gotten excited when I was talking about the music and somehow pushed the bench really far away from the piano. So the entire piece, I was struggling, like, when can I move the bench, but do it gracefully? And I didn't find the opportunity. So I was really struggling, to be very honest. But that said, that changes my posture when I play, when I sit so far away. When I was younger and I was going through my most insecure moments of playing, where I was really not sure about my voice, I noticed one of the things that I did a lot was I would hunch because I was trying to control things, keep things in order. And now as I've become like, yeah, so what? You get older and you're like, the heck with it, right? I'm not going to worry about that. Life is too short. Your posture starts to straighten up and you sit back and you enjoy the music more. But you become way more conscious of the sort of the physiology of the playing, the sort of the use of weight, and gesture. And it's not just the fingers. Everyone thinks it's the fingers. It actually emanates from the core, which is the waist. This is the trunk, the root. And the best playing from pianists comes, of course, when you're in a completely relaxed state. You can just allow the hands and the weight of the hands to simply go into the piano. You can feel it, and you can hear the difference. I remember, I have to tell you this anecdote just as a tribute to my great mentor, Raymond Hansen. Passed away when he was 97 in 2017. And he used to say, he and his wife Anne, both concert pianists, fabulous teachers, used to live in Western Mass, and there would be snow falling. And he had this beautiful way of sort of translating sound and notions of sound through nature. And he would say, Mia, when you play quietly, right, imagine snow that falls for miles from the heavens, right? But when it lands on the ground, it's just utterly weightless, right? It doesn't go thud like that, right? After falling, it's totally weightless. And then if you think of that kind of imagery, it suddenly translates into the relaxation of muscles and ultimately into sound, So I don't know if that sort of answers your question.
Well, I'd love to hear your interpretation of your body motion into sound production.
Yeah. There's a sort of a dance.
Yeah,
there's a choreography. Yeah,
right. I saw your choreography.
That's absolutely right.
And is it the same every time you play it?
Yes and no. I think, we do spend a lot of time sort of figuring physically how something is going to be done and mapping it out. But being on stage, there's always like little frying pans that come your way.
Yeah. Your bench is too far away.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's what it means to be human, right?
Thank you for such a beautiful concert. It really blessed us. And thank you for sharing your faith. That was really special, how your faith helps to educate your playing. My question was about the second movement, the Adagio movement.
Great.
And it started with sort of a huge contrast and maybe tension between treble and bass. And they were in contrast with each other, and they were almost fighting with each other. And then at some point, I sort of envisioned this being God and man. And at some point it resolved, but then later on it diverged again. What do you think Beethoven was saying to us there?
So are you referring to the third movement, to the final
Second.
The second movement?
Yes.
So the conversation, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what he's exploring here is sort of the stretching out of the expanse of the hands until we get to... He's preparing that resolution.
There's almost a resolution there.
Yeah,
isn't it?
absolutely.
Yes.
And you see the bass line descending chromatically. Yeah. It's a beautiful design, but I never thought of it that way. It's very interesting.
I was just wondering what you thought his interpretation of it was, what he was trying to...
those sorts of ideas are really helpful, when you're playing, to have conviction, right, about what is being said. I've never thought of it that way, but visualization, sort of concepts like that are an aid when you're interpreting a work. So thanks for contributing that. Appreciate it.
Thank you again.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much for being with us tonight.
Oh, pleasure.
And I wondered if you'd be so kind to share what sparked, in your bio you say, your great interest in the work of Christian study centers and founding the Octet Collaboration.
Well, thank you for that question. I'm still scratching my head, too, about this, but I totally believe it was God's sort of providence in bringing me into that realm. I think I understood something about myself that I hadn't before, which is that my whole goal was to integrate what I do with my faith. But, how do I do that? I can't do that when I'm just playing concerts, or I can generically say I do this for the glory of God. But, how do I explicitly integrate, right, this notion of theological concepts and ideas into the interpretation of a work? It wasn't explicit that way. So this, for example, is an example. This is a show and tell of that kind of work. Study centers are sort of an even higher and larger container of that kind of integration, and across disciplines, if you will. And what I realized is that my desire was not just to study music and faith, but these things as they inform other disciplines too. if that makes sense. Like, what are the analogs, the analogies in other disciplines? I'd love to learn from other scholars who are in the social sciences, in the natural sciences, in the humanities, and other fine artists. So it was that thirst and interest that I think ultimately helped me make sense of my own yearnings. And it was only because of God's intervention and saying, go to MIT and do this, and I'm scratching my head. It was as wild to me as it sounds to you. Like, what is this musician doing at, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology? But it's now beginning to make sense, because the question of what it means to be human, or what does it mean to flourish as a human? How does one experience true Sabbath rest? It's in these exercises of exploring awe and wonder in nature and in art, right? Where we understand what we are as humans. It's exercising wisdom, like biblical wisdom in science and technology. It's offering intellectual humility and hospitality to people who differ from you and modeling the kind of shalom that God would have us model. So these are all expressions of a kind of Sabbath rest. And so now I've found basically it's the fulfillment of what I've always hoped for, but it came in the most unexpected way. Thank you so much for your question.
What spoke to you? What spoke to you, when you were choosing the song?
I'm sorry. I heard when you were choosing the song.
Sorry. What spoke to you when you were choosing the song?
What spoke to me? Yeah. The reason I chose this piece, and trust me, it's not because I've been playing it a lot recently. I had to dust it off. But it was because it was the first major piano work that he wrote after the Heiligenstadt Testament. And so to be able to describe that crisis in 1802 and to say, this follows 1803-04 on the heels of that cataclysmic crisis and reflects the kind of tension and large-scale resolution that he was seeking to explore in his music. That's why I chose it. But thank you so much for that question. Did that make sense?
Thank you.
Awesome, of course.
Time? Yeah, one more question. Would that be okay?
I'm lucky to be the final one to ask you a question. Sure. So thank you for your amazing performance. My question is, you study Beethoven's music. Of course, we can see in depth. So do you feel like in some way you get to know him very well? And how does his music, even his life, impact your faith?
Yeah.
And Beethoven didn't have easy life. Sometimes I compare him with Job.
Yes.
So what's your understanding of suffering through study and performance his music?
Such a good question. So how long you got here? Fantastic question. And I'm so grateful that you asked that at the very end, because first of all, I will say I believe that Beethoven knew Jesus intimately. And I say that with confidence. The reason I say that, and the evidence for that, exists in the way that he wrote in his late phase. So the crisis of becoming deaf in around 1802, he was fully deaf around 1815. The loss of his hearing, although it seemed like a crisis, we would, as humans, say this is a limitation that he cannot overcome. The very faculty that he needs to become and to flower as the greatest composer of his generation or of that time. Seems illogical that he could become a great composer, or even greater, without his hearing. But the truth is, he could hear everything in his mind's ear, right? Even though he didn't have the receptor within his eardrums, right? To actually hear sound. So by 1815, he's fully deaf. But what happens is he begins to close in on himself, and he becomes a recluse, becomes more isolated, more distant from society. He, of course, drinks heavily as a consolation. We do know that. He suffered from cirrhosis of the liver. But towards the end of his life, around 1819, he starts to explore Handel's Messiah. And he studies it in depth because by 1821, he starts to embark on writing his own Mass, the Solemn Mass. And he calls that the crown of his works, like the epitome of his creation. And in that Mass, of course, you have 5 movements: Kyrie, Gloria, Credo, Sanctus, Agnus Dei. And the Credo, which is the 3rd movement, encompasses the Christian creeds, right? He's poring over the Catholic Mass structure, but as informed by Handel's Messiah. He was totally taken by Handel's Messiah, okay, absorbed in it. And what happens is then the textures of that sacred music, recitative, aria, fugue, all these symbolic references to sacred music start spilling over into his late works, like the 9th Symphony, his late piano sonatas, his string quartets. So he was sort of obsessed, like fixated on these symbols of sacred music, if you will. But the thing about Beethoven's music that is so magnificent is the extreme vulnerability of his expression. He's very human, right? He goes through his tirades. Sometimes he's irascible. Could you hear sort of the irascible quality, you know, the tempestuous, right? He's sort of the fist in the air, the defiance, right? But at the same time, towards the end, what we experience is a kind of a tenderness, a pain, if you will, right? That very few composers prior could have even touched. Vulnerability. You know, that's like Opus 110, his penultimate sonata, right? So this was unprecedented, the vulnerability. But yet, what becomes very clear in the course of that sonata is an explicit understanding of fallenness and redemption. Then it comes through musical symbols. So that's maybe for another occasion. But that's Abram. Abram heard me give a talk on that piece. That's one of my favorite works because the narrative is so explicit. The Christocentric redemptive narrative comes through in shining colors. So, he was rough around the edges. He was not a perfect person, right? He was definitely not the picture of a saint, but he was a man in need of salvation, and he found it through his art form. And I think suffering was a huge ingredient or component towards pressing him in that direction. Thank you.
Well, thank you again.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Thanks for being here. Thank you. Okay. And also, I have the Heiligenstadt Testament, if anyone wants to see
You should all come read
this
it.
letter. Yeah. I'll keep it
We
up
also
here.
will welcome you downstairs for reception now at this time. So thank you very much. Good night.